setting light in the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet, and Happy New Year! I'm recording this on New Year's Day. I don't know when it will be up, hopefully soonish. I really didn't like taking a whole week to edit one video, but I've got a little bit more time where I don't have to be loaded down with schoolwork, and I'm still at home with my family, so that's nice. I know on the whole, in terms of the state of the world, these past couple years and the beginning of this year have not been great, but I hope life is at least treating you decently and you're surviving, and regardless, I hope my videos can bring you some kind of happiness, and I hope your holiday season was good too, but we're not really here to talk about any of that. Today we are talking about another film that was on the list of movies that I put into that poll. Again, Creepshow ended up winning that poll. That review is out. Shocker was a close second, and this movie came in third, and that film is Alucarda, and this is a film that I was asked to review by my friends Kale. If I pronounce any names incorrectly in this video, just please correct me. He is someone I connected with through Letterboxd, and he said, hey, I've been watching your videos, can you review this movie? I had kind of seen this one floating around and it looks cool and kind of up my alley, so I was like, yeah, sure. And then I was also hearing my friend Ria from the band Karnstein, who their name obviously comes from a story that I hold very near and dear to my heart, Carmilla, and they make gothic horror inspired black metal from a queer perspective, which is just like everything I love at once. Ria has talked about this film as being one of her favorites, so between those two things, I am gonna be reviewing it today. Go check out Kale on Letterboxd and go check out Ria's band Karnstein, because both of them are great. And this copy of Alucarda is from Mundo Macabro, who focus on, as they say, their little slogan is the wild side of world cinema. So their focus is international cult films, and I will be talking a little bit more about this actual release of the film at the end of the video, but just know up front that I highly recommend it. And also know up front that this is going to be a spoilery review. I kind of used to do the spoiler section thing, but I've kind of stopped doing that just because talking about everything all at once just helps my thoughts flow a little bit better. If you don't want this movie spoiled for you, maybe go watch it before the review. Alucarda is a film that came out in 1977. It was directed by Juan Lopez Moctezuma, who also directed The Mansion of Madness, which is a film based on The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather by Edgar Allan Poe, which is one of his comedy stories, so I would be very interested to see what that movie's about, as well as directing Mary, Mary, Bloody Mary, and being the producer of the cult western El Topo. And this film stars Tina Romero, who was also in Broken Flag, Las Poquianchis, and Las Lloronas as recently as 2004. It stars Claudio Brook, who was also in Moctezuma's film The Mansion of Madness, and was in Luis Buñuel's Simon of the Deserts, Santo and the Wax Museum, and Guillermo del Toro's Cronos. Susanna Camini, who was in Moctezuma's movies The Mansion of Madness and Mary, Mary, Bloody Mary, as well as To Kill a Stranger, The Wailer 2, Day of the Dead, and Prisión de Mujeres, if I'm pronouncing that correctly at all. Again, I apologize, but that translates to women's prison. And this film stars David Silva, who was in Moctezuma's The Mansion of Madness, as well as El Topo, and was also in The Brainiac, The Castle of Purity, which also stars Claudia Brook, and The Batwoman. This film is crazy, so I'm just gonna read the plot synopsis on the back of it, because the plot is something. It tells of the strange friendship between two young girls, Justine and Alucarda, and how their relationship destroyed the lives of those around them in a torrent of blood, death, and damnation. Yeah, that's basically the whole movie. Pretty much the only other thing you need to know is that it takes place in a convent, and that Satan is involved. The one thing I will say about this synopsis is I kind of went into this with expectations of it being kind of tied to the lesbian vampire archetype and kind of Carmilla inspired themes, so I was kind of like strange friendship, really. And after seeing the film, yeah, sure, no desperate kissing or lusty sexual undertones, just good old-fashioned platonic buddies. That's sarcasm, if you couldn't tell. And I am someone who would very much not mind if there was more just platonic relationships kind of centralized in movies, but between the actual kissing on the lips, verbal declarations of love, and paraphrased passages of Carmilla in the dialogue, that's not what this movie is. But anyway, the score for this film was done by Anthony Griffin under the name Tony Griffin, and he also did the scores for The Stuff, Deadly Eyes, and as recently as 2009 did the score for the film Euphoria. It's very heavy on synths and keys and a pipe organ-y sort of sounds with maybe a little bit of clean acoustic guitar mixed in there, although I couldn't really tell, but it's a very just sort of ambient, spooky score. There aren't very many distinctive things about it. It's a solid sounding score, but there's just nothing really prominent about it in my head. Although there are a few scenes where it doesn't feel very backgroundy. Someone will just like exclaim something and freak out, and then there'll just be this huge sting of organ and it'll get really intense all of a sudden, and it's more funny than anything else, but it's a solid score. I liked it. Visually speaking, I was immediately into the kind of exaggerated gothic period piece feel of the whole movie. It's kind of exaggerated, but it's not over detailed, if that makes sense. All the essentials of what's supposed to be there are there, and they're very prominent, and they're kind of beating you over the head with it, but it looks really cool. And you've got this kind of spooky looking derelict convent, you've got this crypt, you've got some really nice outdoor locations that I kind of wish they had utilized more because they were very pretty. And you've got some other scenes where it's just very dark and people are kind of in the middle of nowhere, but you're so focused on the batshit insanity of what the characters are doing that you're not really worried about where they are. And cinematography-wise, I wasn't that focused on the camera work itself. There are some kind of interesting pans and kind of unusually dramatic zooms in a few places, but my favorite shot in the film is the very first introduction of the character of Alucarda after like the intro of the movie where we like see her as a tiny baby. But Justine has just moved into this convent and she's just standing there, and there's something behind her that looks like her shadow, but you're kind of like, that's slightly off. Something's not quite right here. And then the shadow turns around because it's just been kind of this mess of dark hair this whole time, and Alucarda is standing behind her, and you don't know how she's gotten into the room or anything, but it's just like, oh, that's a shadow. No, that's Alucarda. And it's a really cool shot. It's one of the high points of the film for me. And I really liked the costumes in this movie too. The nun costumes are a lot. Those are some really hefty crosses they were wearing around, but I'm very into Alucarda and Justine's looks because they are very distinctive, and they're not the most unique costumes ever, but I just liked Alucarda's kind of just solid black look that none of the other characters in the film had, and all the outfits that Justine wears in the film were very pretty too. Story-wise, this movie moves fast. Like, we get an opening scene of the birth of Alucarda and this person coming to take her away, and the mom, who I think is also played by Tina Romero, who plays Alucarda, is like, please keep my baby safe and away from all the sinful things of the world, and she's taken away from the convent, and that proceeds to absolutely not happen. After that opening scene, we get a few establishing shots of Justine moving into the convent, and one of the nuns there being like, here's where everything is. I really hope you find yourself at home here and things work out, and if there's anything you need, let me know. And it very quickly establishes through those words that that's exactly what's not going to happen. And then, like, as soon as Justine has gotten into the room, we get the really cool shot that I mentioned before, and Alucarda's in the room, and Alucarda like dumps a box of stuff she collects out on the bed and is like, here's all these cool rocks and little insects and things, and these symbolize different things, and this one means we're friends, and they're like immediately connected, and Justine's never like, who are you, where the hell did you come from? And like we immediately cut to them just like running out in the woods, and maybe more time is meant to have passed, but my brain just read it like, okay, they're just running around now. This is happening very fast. And that's just kind of the whole movie. The whole thing runs like a little under an hour and 20 minutes long, and it just wastes no time in doing everything. The first few scenes before the film just falls completely off the rails are borrowed right out of the original Sheridan Le Fanu Carmilla novel. First, after they've been running around, Justine and Alucarda see this funeral procession going by. Alucarda's not visibly upset by the procession the way Carmilla is in the novel and a lot of the adaptations, like The Vampire Lovers, but she says these similar things about, you know, everyone must die, but imagine having this beautiful life beyond death. And I'm like, this is sounding familiar. And then they're walking around and they run into this, I guess, peddler character. I just called him the Amulet Man because he's trying to sell them amulets to ward off evil spirits. They go with him and meet his associate who reads Justine's fortune and is like, you've got some bad shit in your future, which is to say, I see nothing in your future. You don't have a future. Amulet Man is continuing to try and sell them things, and again, Alucarda seems very less visibly upset by Amulet Man than Carmilla does in the book, but he still says some stuff. I think it's about like having stuff to make her bad dreams go away, and she's like very visibly upset by it and runs off. And then there's a scene with them in a crypt, and Alucarda says some stuff about dying as lovers may and dying into me, and it's very, very like almost verbatim the words from Le Fanu's novel, but not exactly. But it's close, and it's just very, very Carmilla. But again, she's saying this stuff like a few minutes after they've just met in Justine's room. Again, I don't know what the passage of time is supposed to be in this film, so maybe they've just met in that scene and now we're seeing them, you know, weeks or months later, and Alucarda's confessing her undying devotion to Justine, but it felt very, very rushed to me. I was like, has Justine even said, like, much of anything to you at all, Alucarda? What's going on here? But then in the crypt, they happen across the body of someone named, and I quote, Lucy Westenra, like that Lucy Westenra. And based on the stuff that I've read on the internet, apparently Lucy Westenra is supposed to be Carda. I'm going to call Alucarda Carda for short sometimes, just because I have that written in my notes. Lucy Westenra is Carda's mom, but that is not clear in the film, so it's just like, oh, I guess Lucy Westenra is also in this movie. And then you've also got the Bram Stoker reference of Alucarda being named Alucarda and just having this kind of differently gendered version of the name Alucard. So this film just plays into the whole, oh my god, Alucard is Dracula spelled backwards thing that's been going on for years and continues to go on. Carda and Justine make a little blood pact, and you've got the dagger thing going on. And I feel like a lot of the 70s vampires, with the exception of the hammer ones, tended to be a lot more into the dagger thing than the fang thing, or at least like the 70s Spanish vampires, like between this and Blood Spattered Bride. There's a lot more daggery stuff than fangy stuff happening. And then there's a whole lot of screaming that goes on in the crypt, and I'm not really sure why. And then they wind up back in the room, and I was warned about this because the literal cover of the film says more blood, loud screaming, and nudity than any horror film I can think of. Rhea also told me this is like one of the screamiest movies ever made, but I wasn't expecting the screaming to just come out of nowhere the way it does in this movie. Like, we get just one moment they're sitting in the room in the convent, and then suddenly Carda's just like, we must pledge ourselves to Satan, and starts just like screaming the names of like Belphegor and Beelzebub like at the top of her lungs with increasing shrillness, until suddenly Amulet Man is summoned into the room. And I was not expecting Amulet Man to return, but there he is. And then I was just frantically writing notes, and I looked down for 1 second, and then I looked back up, and Alucarda didn't have clothes on anymore. So I don't know how that happened, because it was like a split second. Like, I looked down, I looked up, her clothes were gone. So I don't know if there was any kind of process of clothes removal, or they just like disappeared, or what happened there. But then weird nude satanic ritual starts happening in the middle of the room, and Amulet Man is there. And in regards to the actual use of nudity in this film, it feels a lot more akin to the way I feel about the nudity in Hammer's Karnstein trilogy than a lot of the other like non-British European vamp-sploitation movies of this time that I've seen, in the way that it feels very frank, and it's clearly kind of being done for a presumed male gaze. It's very exploitative and sort of meant to sexualize the characters, but it's not necessarily a sexual situation that's happening, with like one very, very major exception in this movie. But like every other scene, it's just like, okay, the characters don't have clothes on and they're doing some kind of crazy unholy ritual, or they're killing somebody, and it's unnecessary nudity. It's clearly a big part of why the film was made, and it's clearly an exploitative thing, but it never feels to me and my eyes like it's sexualizing the characters, even though it is, because they're not necessarily doing sexual things. It just doesn't feel intrusive on the plot necessarily. It's just kind of happening, as opposed to in a movie like Vampires, which I enjoy, and the sex scenes that happen in that movie are a major part of the whole plot of the film, but they're pretty drawn out and pretty extensive, and they're just kind of a lot. Or even The Blood-Spattered Bride, which is kind of my favorite movie of this subgenre from this period, which I feel like is somehow both simultaneously very kind of feminist for its time, but also very exploitative, and it's like walking that line constantly. Has a lot more just kind of aggressively sexual scenes, and in this movie they're just kind of like, okay, I guess they don't have clothes on. And the actual like little ritual scene that we get actually feels like a precursor to the ritual scene in Blood of the Tribbids, which is a total tribute to all of these 70s vamp exploitation movies, but that film's scene feels a lot less exploitative, mostly because I know a lot more about the process of the making of that film, but also because there's not kind of this intrusive presence of this male figure on the whole scene, which happens in the case of Amulet Man in this movie. I don't know why they decided that Amulet Man, rather than being like the Harbinger-esque, villager-esque character that he is in other movies, they made him like a part of this satanic coven. It's definitely a different take, and one that surprised me, but I'm still not sure if I like it or not. And then, yeah, after that happens, suddenly Justine and Carta are in the middle of the woods with a bunch of other nude female bodies, including the one of the fortune teller they met before, and they're all dancing in a circle to summon Satan. And then a bunch of guys walk out of the woods, and we see like some of the actual only male nudity in any of these films that I've ever seen ever, but it's very brief, and it leads to a Satan summoning orgy scene with a bunch of heterosexual sex in it. At least I think it is. I wasn't really paying close attention to it. It's just kind of a bunch of bodies on top of one another that I didn't want to look at that much, so that kind of happened. And the only really point to that scene is the ritual is happening in the woods, I guess, and one of the sisters in the convent is like praying for their souls and like crying blood and freaking out because of their incantation. The plot of this movie just moves so abruptly from one thing to another and is just batshit crazy and very, very thin, but it's never boring. There's a whole scene where they like just start chanting the praises of Satan in the middle of a Bible verse reading, and they just start screaming stuff about Satan as their master. Afterwards, they're like, we're so sorry, we have no idea what we were saying. And this was the point in the movie where I was like, are they supposed to not know what they're doing? Because up until this point, I really felt like Alucarda has been in on this since the beginning. She's known the coven, she's been with the coven, and she wanted to be with Justine and bring her into this, but based on what they're saying now, it seems like they were possessed by whatever was inside Lucy Westenra before when they went to the crypt, and that's why all the screaming then. And after that, there's a random possession in the middle of the room, and Carta summons Amulet Man, and all of that stuff happens. But I kind of much prefer the interpretation that they are kind of knowingly doing all of this evil stuff and kind of reveling in it, rather than the, oh, we're so sweet and innocent, we've been possessed by Satan, we don't know what we're doing, because it kind of removes all their power from the situation and just kind of takes all the fun out of it. This movie does and doesn't explain itself. They give explanations for things, but they're thin, and they're explanations I don't like, so I kind of reject them. But regardless of what the actual intent is, just the scenes of, you know, Justine and Carta followed by other people just being aggressively blasphemous in the middle of this convent that is clearly written to be very just rigidly religious, watching them like undermine it and everybody there freak out is pretty fun. The whole idea that they've been possessed by Satan leads to this exorcism scene, which is one of the hardest to watch scenes in the film. Justine and Carta just get put up on these racks that look like crosses. It looks like they're being freaking crucified, which is very ironic. And there's this priest going around trying to tell the body to get out in the name of Satan, and he's like, I must find the devil's mark on this girl's body, and he like tears her clothes off, and it's very, very kind of exploitative and nasty towards Justine, and Carta's screaming, and they pretty much just bleed her to get the spirit out, and then she dies. It's actually a very beautifully shot scene. It's hard to watch, which I think is the point, but that's kind of the thing. I don't know what this film's intent actually is, because it's never ever clear whether or not the film wants us to be on the side of the priest and the convent as kind of these vampire hunters, or if we're supposed to be with, you know, Carta and Justine, at least not at this point in the film, because particularly at this point, they end up basically killing Justine, and then this doctor walks into the room and basically calls out the whole convent on their bullshit and is like, you have just murdered a girl in the name of faith. We are not living in the middle of these witch hunts anymore. You've just committed murder. I'm taking Alucarda with me. Stay the fuck away from her. I don't want you killing some other innocent person. And I was totally on board with him. Except that we already know that there are actual demons in this world, so I don't know what this movie is trying to do. It just baffles me. But that scene in particular actually felt like a criticism of Christian institutions and the way they can do stuff in some way. One that gets undermined later by the movie, but I did like that scene in that way. It just was not fun to watch Justine die and to watch Carta have to watch her die. And then later on, Carta kind of connects with this other girl. And then during this big final battle, she like falls down the stairs and it seems like she might die. And it's just like, are we gonna ruin Alucarda's happiness twice in a row? And of course this movie is, because it doesn't want Alucarda to live because she's possessed by Satan. Granted, we do get a huge chaotic magic battle finale between Alucarda and basically everyone in the convent, and it's wild, and I'll talk about it more in the effects section. But the actual ending of the movie is just Alucarda kind of dying, and that's more or less what I was expecting out of the ending of this movie, but it still wasn't an ending I liked. However, I will say of Tina Romero's performance during her ending, I mean, she's been at 11 for the whole movie, but her death very much could almost rival Margaret Hamilton's I'm Melting scene in The Wizard of Oz. Like, it's a lot. Character-wise, I don't like the way the characters are written, per se, but I like the characters and I enjoyed the acting. And to kind of elaborate on that, Justine is like barely written at all. Like all we know about her is that her parents are gone and she lives at the convent now, and she's made a blood pact with Alucarda. And she's just kind of this empty character, which is not good writing, but I actually liked the character, and I've kind of found myself kind of gravitating towards a lot of characters that I've heard other people say are just kind of bland or empty or underwritten, but the fact that there's not a lot there kind of means that I kind of end up projecting some of my own feelings onto the character, and particularly if in a lot of scenes they aren't like verbalizing their thoughts and they're just kind of sitting there, I can just sort of imagine what might be going through that character's head right now, and forces me to fill in the blanks. Again, there's a lot lacking there in writing, but I still liked the character and connected with the character. Alucarda, on the other hand, is a lot from the get-go. She just immediately starts talking and is very intense and is kind of almost forceful towards Justine, but Justine never seems to mind. She's just like, yeah, okay, and goes along with everything. And then most of their acting for the movie consists of them either just kind of sitting there and staring into the camera or screaming their heads off. And it was really entertaining. I found Justine's screaming sometimes both grating and laughable, but it was really fun. It's not good acting, really. It feels like a screaming contest, honestly, but I just don't care, because this movie is crazy and I was never bored. In regards to any of the other characters that aren't Alucarda or Justine, with the exception of the Doctor, they're all pretty much just like over-the-top repressive religion kind of characters, and there's not a lot of distinctiveness to them, and I couldn't care less. They do eventually try to play up the role of this one, I don't know if he's a monk or a priest or what exactly his actual status is, but this one guy in the convent who's clearly has it in for Alucarda and Justine, and they really try to play him up as this demon expert Van Helsing character, and he ends up drawing the Doctor over to his side, and he's just like, I'm a man of science, but I've never seen anything like this before. I guess demons are real. And he's right, but I am 100% on the demon side in this movie, so I don't like him anymore. Even when I kind of gravitate towards the demons and the vampires more than the characters hunting them, I tend to have a little bit of a soft spot for the Slayer Hunter characters. But in the case of this movie, I feel like our Van Helsing character has a lot more in common with Peter Cushing's Vile from Twins of Evil than he does with Peter Cushing's Van Helsing. And going back to Alucarda one more time, the one thing I really did like about her as a character was that she was genuinely scared for her love interests throughout the movie. A lot of times we kind of just saw her freaking out or giving dead-eyed scares or just reveling in her evilness, all of which was very entertaining. But when anything happens to Justine or the girl who she connects with later, she's genuinely scared for that person. We see this kind of tragic side to Alucarda that isn't the, oh, woe is me, I've been possessed by a demon. It's, oh dear God, this one person who I care about is about to be taken away from me. And speaking of that one person who isn't Justine, the person who we meet later, who we barely get to know, I think she's the daughter or the associate of the Doctor guy. Her whole kind of character trait is that she's blind, and I'm not really one to speak on portrayals of blindness in film. I genuinely have no idea what I'm talking about, but the way she's just kind of always looking past everything and feeling on everything does feel very exaggerated and not accurate for what my opinion is worth. But I did actually like the character, even though it's very abrupt, just like the connection between Carda and Justine, the connection between her and Alucarda. There seemed to actually be some nice chemistry there, even though we're supposed to know that Alucarda is a vicious demon who's going to take advantage of her. Besides the just constant bananas screaming scenes, the effects are what make this movie a lot of fun, because you've got all the garish red paint looking 70s blood, and I do mean all the blood. Like, we just have characters covered head to toe in blood. There's blood gushing everywhere in certain scenes, and there's a scene where Justine emerges from a coffin of blood, which is another nice little callback to Carmilla. And there's decapitation, blood spurting out of people's necks, and it's all not realistic looking, but they're fun practical effects. And there are a few cheesy but enjoyable visual effects. There was a scene where, while the whole Satan ritual thing in the middle of the woods was happening, it seemed like the sister who was still praying in the convent was like levitating off the ground like subtly, and I thought that was cool. And the death scenes of Justine and Alucarda feel like they're a bit of a throwback to what we see in like the Universal movies, because it's just like a fade to a charred body rather than a practical effect, which I can understand given their budget. I don't really care because I'm just kind of used to it because I love those movies, but it doesn't quite feel in keeping with the crazy gore that they've had in the film. The highlight of the film, however, for me, besides that one subtle, creepy, cool, shadowy shot at the beginning, the highlight of this film is the magic battle at the climax, because Alucarda starts like chanting the names of like Beelzebub and Astaroth and Belphegor, and by chanting I mean shrieking at the top of her lungs as she does, and as she's doing it, she's kind of waving her hands at people, and members of the convent start just bursting into flames. Like, they actually like set these people's clothes on fire. There were people just running around in flames. The whole set was on fire. It's crazy. And until the ending, and the kind of mediocre ending where they like show her a cross and she freaks out and disintegrates, there's like this magic battle going on between her and members of the convent, and they're like trying to approach her and fighting her, and she's like got this like flame shield that she'll throw up, and then she'll like throw fireballs at them, and it's all practical real fire that's on set and very dangerous, and it's insane, and I loved it. So overall, this is a movie. Based on some of the stuff I've said, it sounds like I'm kind of exasperated and frustrated by this movie, which in some ways I am, but I love this movie. I really, really enjoy it. It's not a particularly thoughtful film, at least in my eyes. Whatever message it does have is kind of muddled, and the muddled message it does seem to have is like evil queer witch ladies bad, but also maybe Christian authority bad. I don't know. Again, the message is muddled, but it's a short, decent watch. The aesthetic is cool, the practical effects are cool, and it's just constantly crazy. And it also has some little nuggets in there for me being the Carmilla addict that I am. And because of that, I'm really not sure where to place this in my collection. Should I put it with my Carmilla movies? Should I even put it with my vampire movies? Because people's necks do get bitten, blood is consumed, but it's never clear whether or not they are vampires. And again, there's the allusions to Dracula and to Carmilla, but it could also be a demonic possession film or a witch movie. I don't know. But overall, it's over-the-top, baffling madness, and I had a lot of fun with it. And release-wise, if you would be interested in seeing this film, I would absolutely recommend picking up the Mundo Macabro release. It's a good print of the film. I haven't had a chance to dive into any of the special features because I literally just got this film, but there's an interview with Guillermo del Toro, who did even, work with Claudio Brook on Kronos, and there's a documentary on the film's director, there's a text interview with the film's director, and based on the del Toro interview alone, because he's one of my absolute favorite directors, I'm thrilled about this, and based on the other Mundo Macabro release I own, which is Blood Spattered Bride, they do a really good job with their releases and the really kind of insightful special features they put on these things, so I do think this would be a worthwhile thing to add to your collection. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel because I never actually say that at the end of any of my videos. I just kind of put it during the outro in words, but I'm going to say it now. If you enjoy my review, please subscribe and, like and comment and all the things that you're supposed to say when you're a YouTuber. And please let me know if you've seen this, how you would categorize it. Do you think it's a Carmilla adaptation or just something that borrows liberally from Le Fanu? Do you think it's a vampire movie? Do you think it's a witch movie or a demonic possession movie? Do you think it's all of those things at once or none of them? Please tell me, because I don't know. And yeah, that is my review of Alucarda. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye!